So, good evening, everybody. Oh, I need to adjust my camera a little bit there. Okay. So, good evening. Welcome to the final webinar for 2016. And can hear some of you saying good riddance to 2016. But we're gonna continue our look at that and hopefully come away with some actually productive discussion and productive ways to keep moving forward. And I'm hoping that we're going to come across some themes, because we need themes, we need ideas, we need to start building our own metaphors and such. So without any further ado, we've got quite a bit to cover here. We're going to jump right in. And the first thing that I want to start with is some insightful observations from the media. Since the election has taken place, there's been a lot written in the media, and I try to go through and look at things that are insightful from the media in terms of connecting with people's values, beliefs, and also how that's not a current part of the playbook, because as we've talked about a lot before, we need to start rewriting the playbook. We need a more successful playbook. We need one that has some new ideas and new frames, as it were. And so to join us tonight, to inspire us, I've brought Fighting Bob along for the final webinar of the year. So here he is, Bobblehead Bob. So he's going to be, his spirit will be with us tonight. So let's start, first of all, the first article here, and you'll be able to Google these if you haven't seen them, by the source, which in this case is The Week. And the title of the article was "Clinton Lost the Most Winnable Election in Modern History." And of course, hindsight being 20/20 vision, but clearly there was a lot of speculation and prediction even before the election that there was potentially some issues going on. So I've highlighted some of the more poignant sections here, and while they're a paragraph, it's a paragraph out of a much larger article. So here's what I saw in The Week that really caught my eye. The first, obviously, this question was asked a lot. Where was the overarching vision for the country and its future? And considering that a lot of state campaigns and election or campaigns that are at the Assembly and Senate level, since the old playbook has them relying on the top of the ticket for message guidance, clearly what happened with the Clinton campaign is they didn't get it, because there was no overarching vision for the country and its future. And what's interesting that this author points out is that the closest to an articulated vision came to a leaked transcript from the private audience of bankers, in which the quote is, "She dreamed of a hemisphere-wide free trade and open border zone." And clearly that does evoke a moral worldview, a moral political worldview, and in this case it was conservative. And as the author points out, that clashed with the populist economic mood. But had she committed herself to evoking that overarching vision, or some kind of passionate repudiation of it, it would have been far better than what she did. And what did she do? She tried to coast to victory on an air of inevitability. I love that phrase, air of inevitability, and an undertow of Trump hatred. So clearly this author perceived what many of us were saying, was that, look, you've got to provide a positive vision, and you can't just coast to victory by relying on people's hatred of your opponent. So that was a very insightful piece there in The Week. And it gets to some of these really critical parts of framing and the why of why people should believe in you and vote for you. Is that if you don't have it, it's not going to happen. So the next piece it pertains specifically to what happened in, as this region of the country has been coined, the Rust Belt. Not terribly fond of that term. We should come up with another one, but be that as it may, this is from The Atlantic, and the article was that Democrats don't have an easy answer for, maybe we could call it for rural America, for rural areas like in rural Wisconsin. And this first sentence really says it all. If they want to win future elections, Democrats are going to have to find something better to say in the Rust Belt. Their current message is not resonating with residents. And they have a quote from a UC Hastings professor saying that Democrats are obsessed with cultural issues. And we've talked about the whole identity politics thing and how that divides people and how it reinforces the conservative idea of divide and conquer. And then this is a really interesting observation, is that both Democratic and Republican administrations have provided no reversal of fortune for the Rust Belt. And so they're saying, here's the economic fact, that both Democrats and Republicans have not provided a reversal of fortune for people living in middle America. And that's not the uplifting message that either party wants to embrace on the campaign trail. So they need to come up with one. And I would argue, as we can discuss a little bit later as well, that I don't think the Democrats who are in the position to develop those messages are capable of producing that type of message. So store that comment for later reference, but I think that's a really big problem, that they're not capable of developing that type of uplifting message that will resonate with people whose economic lives are worse than they were 8 years ago. And that goes for rural and urban areas as well. This is not just a rural issue. It's not just a rural phenomenon. This is a much bigger problem. So that's from The Atlantic. A good piece there. I would recommend reading it if you haven't already. So next, this is from locally, the Capital Times. There's been some pretty good articles coming out of the Cap Times. There was one actually that ran just yesterday about Charlie Sykes, the radio conservative talk show host from Milwaukee, and his leaving WTMJ and what has happened in his mind with Republicans. It's a fascinating read. And if you do it from the context of framing and what his values and beliefs are, it's really interesting, because I think you'll find that he's expressing some biconceptuality there, which is fascinating. So, what does the Cap Times say about why Wisconsin saw its lowest presidential turnout in 20 years? Some good observations here. First of all, from Mark Pocan, clear there was an enthusiasm gap for Democrats in areas like southeastern Wisconsin and, of course, rural Wisconsin. But that enthusiasm gap was in both places. So we know that, but this goes to the point of it not just being a rural problem. So get that on the table right away. And a Republican strategist said as well, enthusiasm gap. And there were a lot of people who were puzzled that what happened in the election doesn't happen very often. And that is where there are more votes cast in an election statewide overall than there were for president. So there were actually people who turned out and voted for Ron Johnson or the Libertarian candidate for Senate or Russ Feingold and didn't vote for president. Really, really, really interesting there. So people, particularly Republicans, were energized about helping Ron Johnson defeat Russ Feingold. So that is a really interesting fact that I think speaks volumes to the failure of the Feingold campaign to communicate an inspiring message to people. And then Johnson turned the tables and came out towards the end of the campaign with all these really wonderful, positive imagery campaign ads that were all about a brighter future and what that looked like. So really interesting differences in strategy there. And I found this to be a really interesting observations from Barry Burden, who is a professor of political science at UW-Madison, who said that Clinton failed to turn out her voters when they are, and then this is interesting, aside from minority groups and young people, that the rest of her base are reliable voters, and it didn't come together for her. So what's interesting about that is Clinton had serious problems with the minority and young vote, and that showed not only in exit polls but in the turnout. So that's an interesting observation. And then to say that the rest of her base are reliable voters, well, she didn't inspire them to turn out either. So thus the huge drop-off from 2008 and 2012. So clear enthusiasm problem, not inspiring, not motivating people. And then next, so this is the second to last here, and believe me, we're going somewhere with this. There is a bigger point that's going to be made in regard to all this, and I have a feeling you're going to see where this is going. But let's look at this from The Nation. So this is from John Nichols in The Nation, and this is a really brilliant observation here. So at too many turns, Nichols writes, the Democrats settled for this message that will never be as nasty as the Republicans. Right? The whole idea of just continuing to hammer on how nasty and homophobic and sexist Trump was a kind of an overarching theme for the Clinton campaign. And then he points out, as is a very astute observation for John Nichols and to write in The Nation, that this love trumps hate, this closing motto that came out of the convention, it was just a play on Trump's name rather than a what we're fighting for message. And that's a great observation because, as we know, love trumps hate, with the Trump right in the middle there, just reinforces him. And then the next Democratic Party. So what Nichols is saying is that the next formulation of the Democratic Party, and he's calling for, as you see from the title of the article, we must reform the Democratic Party. That the next Democratic Party must grab that economic populist language back that Trump took advantage of so well, right? And align it with policies and amplify the message, right? So really what Nichols is sensing there, what he's saying is, yeah, we need new language. We need to reframe. We need a new message that's going to grab that populist economics back from the conservatives, right? Reframe it so that it evokes progressive ideas and aligns with progressive policies, and then amplify that message. And I would argue that that is fundamentally what the Democrats need to do. And it must appeal to the voters of America with a vision that tells voters how their circumstances will improve when Democrats are elected. And he's right, because his closing statement is that, look, then it's a movement. Right? That's critical. because he's talking about a positive vision. So here we have John Nichols in The Nation saying what I've been saying for a long time and what George Lakoff has been saying for even longer, and a lot of other people have been saying, look, this is what we need, right? We need that positive vision. We need new language, new messaging strategy, amplify it, align it with our policies, give people a positive vision that says how Democrats will help improve their lives, and then it becomes a movement. So as far as I'm concerned, nothing new there, but to see it in print like this gives us something to go on. Finally, here's the kind of the essential read that has come up recently, which is from The Guardian. It's the title of the article is "Putin Didn't Win This Election for Trump, Clinton Did." And what's so important about this piece here is that it actually talks about kind of what's going on pathologically with kind of the establishment Democrats. And so when you consider what Nichols wrote and kind of what we've all been saying for quite some time, this is really important because, and yeah, that's a great comment, that yes, people, they don't vote on issues, they vote for hope. And if they have information that fosters despair and dispels hope, they're going to try to avoid it. But if that's all they hear, then they're going to gravitate towards whatever it is that provides them hope, which in this case was Trump's message of making America great again. And we'll kind of all see how that played out. So let's look at what the Guardian observation was, is that, so you have, let's say in rural America, the industrial Midwest, people believe that free trade is responsible for their economic woes. And then you have a candidate like Clinton who they never trusted, right? From the very beginning, trust, authenticity issues from the word go, right? So they have somebody who's saying, oh no, I am now against TPP. So they say, well, no, why should we trust you, right? And that was the Clinton campaign's problem. They were bereft of principle and pathologically concerned with optics. And we saw this all over the place. And why is that so important? It's because they really believed that voters would be so repelled and revolted by Trump that they would vote for her. So now we have all this stuff about what did the Russians do, why did they do it, all the questions about voting machines, and all this stuff. The voter ID arguments, in Milwaukee and all that. This is a great observation. It's easier to blame others for our problems than look inward for their origins. So it's really easy for the Democratic establishment to point out that Russia did this. Or now, there's this campaign worker who, through a typo, caused Podesta to give away his password because that person typed in that it's a legitimate email instead of illegitimate, and that was the whole problem because then WikiLeaks and the Russians had access to all Podesta's emails and all that dirty laundry got aired. So that's the problem, right? It's easy to blame that kind of stuff and shady foreign operators than think about why Clinton will not be the one taking the oath on 20th of January. And then the final point here is, as with many psychological defenses, these sorts of evasions are very damaging to long-term health. And the final thing I'll say about this whole email thing, and you can judge for yourself, but what's important to point out is that these are emails that exposed how the DNC operates. It exposed all the dirty laundry. It exposed all the inner workings and underminings and all that kind of stuff that people already didn't trust them. People already didn't trust Clinton. So didn't that just provide evidence that their sense of her and the DNC being untrustworthy was valid? So I would argue that this is a long-term problem, and we've been seeing going on for a long time. And yes, Democrats have not given people something hopeful to talk about. So, feel free to continue commenting, but I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. And I'm going to point out something, just discuss what I've been hearing over the last few weeks. And let me put my, there. So now you can talk to the big giant head. So, and Fighting Bob too. There you go. I'll make his head look bigger than mine. There we go. So, what I've been hearing. So over the last few weeks, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people, discuss future strategies with a lot of people, and I have had the fortune of sitting in on some meetings with some inside people and people that are outside the establishment, and some of those people all at the same table together. And obviously, one of my main focuses is on the messaging. Yes, there are organizational deficiencies, but at the core of everything is what does the Democratic Party stand for and why should people believe in them? And probably one of the most concerning things that I've heard recently, well, there are several, but the first one is that there is a sense from the Democratic Party of Wisconsin and the internal leadership there that the messaging was fine. There was no problem with the messaging. There was actually a problem of them not getting their message out. And from what I've gathered and from what I've been told is that one of the kind of underlying themes of the debriefing sessions that have been going on around the state and these listening sessions is that people didn't know what Russ Feingold's message was. And that people really felt that Hillary's message was the I'm with her and that I'm better than Donald Trump. Donald Trump's a nasty person. And they felt that Russ Feingold's message was he traveled to all 72 counties and listened to people, and Ron Johnson's a bad senator. And there is a lot of angst amongst the internal people at DPW who are saying, well, we just didn't communicate the message enough. We didn't get it out there enough, and everything's fine with the message, we just need to get it out there. And here's my point with that, my response to that. That's a load of malarkey, because the people who are going to all these listening sessions and these debriefings are people such as yourselves who follow politics, who pay attention. They pay attention to campaigns. They listen closely to messages because they want to communicate things to their friends and neighbors and when they do doors and phone calls and such. So to say that there's nothing wrong with the message and the message is fine, when the people who are closest to it can't tell you what it is, and it doesn't inspire or move them, right? You have a message problem. So I have expressed that, and I'm going to continue to do so. But to move on from there, here's the problem. Here's the biggest problem, is that there is such a level of hubris within the internal party structure and the people who are driving the decisions and writing the big checks. There is such a level of hubris that they're refusing to see what the problem is. And they are incapable of admitting that they have a problem with not only messaging, but connecting with people. And here's why. Because at a very fundamental level, and that goes to my next, here we go. This one right, sorry, here we go. Sorry, I skipped a slide there. So this gets to what we do now, because at a very fundamental level, they really believe that messaging is just words on a page that describe a policy. So, for example, for the people who are running the show at DPW, at a very fundamental level, they really believe that a message is nothing more than the words on a piece of paper, or that you say, or that you put out there to communicate about a specific issue. So let's say, for example, education. So they have a message on education. They have a message on the environment. They have a message on inequality. And to them, that's what messaging is. So that's very surface. So to your point, Gail, that you wrote about, people vote for hope. So where is the hopeful message about education if you're just communicating kind of the facts and some stuff about education, that public schools are good, teachers are good, here's some facts to support that. And oh, by the way, Walker and his cronies, or Betsy DeVos and her cronies, are going to cut education, right? So where's the hopeful vision in that message? So the bigger point I want to make tonight, as we kind of close out this year, is that, and it goes to the kind of the subtitle of this webinar, is how do we shake things up? And we need to shake things up by pushing the people that we work with and the people that we connect with in our organizations, because you are all involved within your communities, towards the idea that values and beliefs matter. That's what's important, and that we need to start inspiring people, giving them hope, and that you don't do that by using the old playbook, which has failed for 4 elections now, 2010, 2012, in Wisconsin anyway, 2012 with the recall election, 2000. And what's really bad about that is that this whole kind of atmosphere of hubris that's going on, that within the inner circle, mark my words, when the final analysis is done, you're going to hear a lot about reaching rural voters, and the way to do that is to talk about issues they care about. And that the polling failed, so they need to do a better job of polling. So that's going to be another big one. And then the idea of getting out the vote even more in reliable areas, because that fell off. We know it was because people weren't inspired, but so those are going to be, mark my words, the emphasis is going to be on reaching rural voters with a message about issues they care about. There's going to be nothing at all about connecting people and giving them a message of hope and inspiration, both urban and rural. It's going to be just about rural issues, and there will be nothing done to advance progressive values. So that's number one. And by the way, they may say progressive values, but to them, issues are values. So education will be a value, and healthcare will be a value, and transportation will be a value, and we know how that goes. So it will be about rural issues. It will be about better polling, better and more accurate polling, so that they have an idea of what's going on, and then more kind of boots on the ground, get out the vote kind of thing, to reach people. So, which really is just putting lipstick on a pig, to coin a phrase. It's really not changing anything. It's just shifting the focus to the rural areas. So that's kind of what I see is happening. And the other problem, there's going to be nothing about winning hearts and minds. And here's the problem with that. We need to win hearts and minds, because there's a lot of people. Yeah, that would be a great question. I would like to know what the answer is to that question too. What would you do differently? And I would add, how would you reach people? How would you connect with people? I mean, yes, Hillary Clinton got more popular votes, and we can't overlook that. And it would be very powerful to continue messaging and telling people that, you know, Trump is a minority president. He got a, you know, huge minority of the votes. He doesn't represent all the people. But the Electoral College is how we elect a president. And to the point that was made in one of those articles was, look, you know, she lost in places that Obama won huge. Wisconsin, you know, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Iowa, and Minnesota was incredibly close. I mean, Minnesota shouldn't have been that close. So there were places that she should have won that she didn't. And that was the difference in the election. So we need to win hearts and minds, because there are a lot of your friends and neighbors who voted for Barack Obama twice and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump. And we need to win those hearts and minds back. And you don't do that by pandering to issues, and you don't do that with an inauthentic message. So I'm going to go back to these ideas that it was interesting in one of these meetings I had, one of the more intensive and thoughtful discussions, it was actually brought up that, hey, we should start revoking the 4 freedoms, FDR's freedoms. And that's a place that we should start. And I said hallelujah, because that's going back to the book Whose Freedom, and the idea that freedom is contested, but people know the difference between the progressive idea of freedom and the conservative idea of freedom. You know, the Trump self-interest frame and this hierarchy that he has is how people understand freedom now. That is a value that we can take back, because people still understand empathy. And I know you've seen this before, but I just think repetition and reinforcing it is critically important, right? The idea that freedom comes with responsibility for others. You know, how democracy works. Democracy works when we act with responsibility for others, not just in our own self-interest. And then these values about how our freedom, our prosperity depends on each other, on the public, and people acting with empathy toward each other. And the moral responsibility government and our elected officials have to protect and empower the people they serve. Right? These are values-based models that we need to really start pushing. And these are things we can start pushing in our organizations and our communities. And they're things that I'm going to continue trying to push with, every group that I'm involved with. And it's a way that we can start creating kind of a wave of progressive values that will resonate with people. And when that happens, you know, because they're so focused on their issues, and they're going to be so focused on trying to do literally focus groups, to focus on issues and messages on issues, they're not going to see that these values that we're talking about work on every issue, right? You can have this overarching theme of what freedom and democracy looks like, and it will work on every single issue. And you know, that's a really great point, this whole Occupy the Dems thing. And here, I would encourage you to really get involved at the local level, because that's where change is going to happen. At the county, the congressional district level, this is where change is going to happen. And I would argue that the model that we need to start putting into place is one that has those local organizational connections, networking within each other, doing the really strong values and beliefs-based messaging across every issue, and that you can actually start winning elections by doing that, independent of the current structure. And when you start doing that, when you win some local seats, when you start winning a couple assembly seats here and there that were unexpected, that's when these donors will start to take note and start saying, hey, maybe there's something to this. Maybe we can start changing the model as well. And that's a great point that we need to look at. And the final point that I want to make tonight is, because this is the most important thing for everyone to understand, and for us to get across to the establishment Democrats who are circling the wagons and in a state of hubris. It's my new favorite word, by the way, hubris. These are more than words. And there was a really interesting section of the discussion I had earlier this week that had some internal people, some external people, some union people. It was a great discussion. But there was a point where somebody who will remain nameless said that they thought that Bernie Sanders had the right message, but he was the wrong messenger. And my jaw kind of hit the floor, and as some other people did, because there was somebody in the room who was a staunch Bernie supporter from the beginning. And I raised my hand to be recognized, and I said, that is 100% not true, because you cannot separate the message from the messenger and have it be that effective, right? Bernie Sanders worked because he was the real deal. He was authentic. He had a really well-framed message that gave people hope and resonated with their values and their beliefs, and he embodied that message. And you cannot separate that out and have it be as effective. And Elizabeth Warren is the same way. She is absolutely the same way. And as proof of that, look at how many people ran on a Bernie Sanders platform. They ran on Bernie's message, and they didn't win. They didn't do as well. And it didn't. Yeah, exactly. Yes, he was authentic. His record was consistent with his values, so he was trustworthy. He was the real deal, and those are the kinds of messengers we need. We need the authentic messengers, and the only way we're going to get those authentic messengers is to develop this at a local level, because then people will emerge who gravitate towards those values and they embody those values, and those are the kind of candidates we need. And I would argue we had some of those candidates, no doubt. Locally, especially in Wisconsin, we had some of those candidates, but they were undermined by the establishment lack of message. They just had words, and the words were meaningless, and that undermined some of those really great local candidates. So just to inspire you, what I want to do right now is I want to play, first I'm going to play Bernie Sanders' video that ran, and this shows the authenticity. This shows the kind of message that we need that will resonate with people, and it did resonate with people. So I'm going to play this one first, and you can feel free to comment, obviously. Continue commenting.
Our job is not to divide. Our job is to bring people together. If we do not allow them to divide us up by race, by sexual orientation, by gender, by not allowing them to divide us up by whether or not we were born in America or whether we're immigrants, when we stand together as white, black, and Hispanic, and gay, and straight, and woman, and man, when we stand together and demand that this country works for all of us rather than the few, we will transform America, and that is what this campaign is about. It's bringing people together. Our job.
So I just want to flash back real quick to, if you look at these values that I have up here, right? Everything in that ad resonated with those values, or these values resonate with that ad, right? The idea of freedom with responsibility, yes, together. We come together, and that ad was not about Bernie Sanders, it was about all of us, right? And the type of democracy we should have, and how our prosperity depends on each other, and how the government has a moral responsibility towards us. It evokes all of those values, and that's the kind of that's the kind of message we need. The final one I'm going to play here is actually from Elizabeth Warren talking about the government shutdown a few years back, and you're going to find this interesting because she talks about issues, but the other thing she does is she talks about the progressive worldview of government and how government is what we all do for each other. So this is a great one here.
We are now 3 days into a completely unnecessary, completely avoidable Republican shutdown. And there is more talk than ever about our inability of our leaders to find common ground on central economic and physical issues of our time. We all know how we got here. For years now, we've heard a small minority in this country rail against government. When I hear the latest tirades from some of the extremists in the House, I am struck by how vague these complaints are. The anarchy gang is quick to malign government. But when was the last time anyone called for regulators to go easier on companies that put lead in children's toys, or for food inspectors to stop checking whether the meat in our grocery stores is crawling with deadly bacteria, or for the FDA to ignore whether morning sickness drugs will cause horrible deformities in little babies? We never hear that, not from political leaders in Washington and not from the American people. In fact, whenever the anarchy gang makes headway in their efforts to damage our government, the opposite happens. After the sequester kicked in, Republicans immediately turned around and called on us to protect funding for our national defense and keep the air traffic controllers on the job. And now that the House Republicans have shut down the government, holding the country hostage because of some imaginary healthcare boogeyman, Republicans almost immediately turned around and called on us to start reopening parts of our government. Why do they do this? Because the boogeyman government is like the boogeyman under the bed. It's not real. It doesn't exist. What is real, what does exist, are all those specific, important things that we as Americans have chosen to do together through our government. In our democracy, government is not some make-believe thing that has an independent will of its own. In our democracy, government is just how we describe the things that we, the people, have already decided to do together. The Food and Drug Administration makes sure that the white pills that we take are antibiotics and not baking soda. The National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration oversees crash tests to make sure that all new cars have effective brakes. The Consumer Product Safety Commission makes sure that babies' car seats don't collapse in a crash and that toasters don't explode. We know that government doesn't always work. We know that no institution is infallible. People make mistakes, ideas fail, and sometimes we get things wrong. But our response isn't to give up. Our response isn't to sit back and say, "I told you so." We're not a nation of quitters. Our response, the American response, is to fix it, to make government work better. Our democracy is an experiment, and it's always evolving. We constantly redesign and reimagine and improve on what we want.
So you get the idea, and she continued on with some specifics there. But yes, absolutely, and excellent observations there. Yes, government comes out of the people. Government, we are the people. And what's fascinating, and which I've been pointing out for a while, is this idea that conservatives have created a wall between the people and the government. And right, so instead of evolving, it's been devolving. You know, the wall between the people and the government, so the people view government as this evil, immoral thing. And when you see politicians behaving badly, what do people say? Oh, they all do that. So part of this movement must be to redefine these things, democracy and freedom, so that they are represented again in government, so that those values are represented again in government. And I believe that is the core of what we should be doing in the next year in everything we do, with our organizations, with political parties, our podcasts, blogs, everything. And that's going to be the best way to start this undercurrent of a movement. And yeah, evolving versus set, right. Our government is being sabotaged. And Donald Trump is going to continue that. And that's a good way to put it. So I want to thank you all for a great year, for participating. It's been interesting to see, actually, as this year has gone by. There are more views of the webinars when they're archived, and we're going to be moving the webinars to a different night starting in 2017. It looks like Tuesday and Wednesday are better for people, so I'll make a decision, and come January we'll be convening on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, which seems like it's going to be better for people, so we'll have more people online, and I'm going to be working towards getting more subscribers as well, so we continue to build our family of framers. And then the Train the Trainers is happening next year as well, so a lot of exciting things going on. So thank you. Oh, okay. More votes for Wednesday. Okay. So thank you all for participating, and have a great night and wonderful holiday and a happy new year. And I'll see you when I see you. Thanks.